From the outside, Elon Musk and Justine Musk looked like the couple who had survived everything: bankruptcies, newborn twins, the collapse of one company after another, even the death of their first child. But behind the carefully maintained facade, a quiet fracture had been spreading for years, one that Justine felt long before she ever admitted it out loud. And then one moment arrived, a single message, delivered without warning or emotion, that made her understand her marriage had already ended without her knowledge. That was the moment she stood up, walked away, and never looked back. Young love, relentless pursuit, and the first cracks. The story between Elon Musk and Justine Wilson began long before the world knew his name. It was the mid-1990s at Queen's University in Ontario, and Elon, already intense, analytical, and unusually persistent, noticed her across campus. Their first encounter wasn't romantic. Justine had barely remembered meeting him at a party when he approached her again, asking her out for ice cream. She declined, assuming he would move on, but Elon didn't operate like most people. Hours later, he found her studying, holding two melting cones, refusing to accept defeat. It was awkward, unexpected, and strangely symbolic of everything that would follow. Elon pushing forward, Justine absorbing the pressure. Even as he pursued other women, he kept sending her roses. When he transferred to Wharton, he stayed in touch. And when Justine moved to Japan to teach English, he still found ways to reconnect. By the time she returned to North America, he was no longer just a student with big dreams. He was building Zip2 in Silicon Valley, sleeping in the office, and thinking several moves ahead of everyone around him. She became the soft place he came back to, the emotional balance in a life powered entirely by ambition. They married in January 2000, right after he sold Zip2 and began investing in what would soon become X.com and then PayPal. It should have been the beginning of the life they had imagined, but one small moment during the reception revealed a direction she didn't see clearly yet. As they danced, Elon leaned close and said casually, "I am the alpha in this relationship." Everyone else kept celebrating, but Justine froze. She brushed it off as a joke. But in truth, it was the first time she sensed the hierarchy forming, one that would eventually define their marriage. The loss of Nevada, the silence that followed, and a marriage divided. 2 years after their wedding, Elon and Justine welcomed their first child, Nevada Alexander Musk. For a brief moment, everything felt whole. The long hours, the pressure, the intensity, none of it mattered when they held him. But in May 2002, their world broke open in a way no couple can ever fully prepare for. At just 10 weeks old, Nevada stopped breathing in his sleep. Paramedics brought him back to life, but the oxygen loss had been too long. He was declared brain dead and removed from life support. Justine shattered under the weight of the loss. She cried, she asked questions, she tried to understand what happened. But Elon processed tragedy differently. He compartmentalized, closed the door to emotion, and refused to talk about the grief at all. When she tried to open a conversation about Nevada, he told her he didn't want to discuss it. Not now, not ever. For Justine, the silence felt like a second burial. For Elon, it was a way to keep moving. 2 months later, he suggested they try IVF. He believed in problem solving, in forward motion, in not letting tragedy interrupt progress. She agreed, hoping more children might rebuild their bond. In 2004, they had twins, Griffin and Xavier. In 2006, the triplets arrived, Damien, Saxon, and Kai. 5 young children in just a few years should have filled the house with warmth. Instead, the mansion in Bel Air felt colder, more structured, more like a system than a family. While she was raising 5 children, Justine felt herself becoming invisible inside her own marriage. Elon's world expanded quickly. Tesla, SpaceX, the global attention, the pressure, the obsession with productivity. And with every success, he seemed further away. He controlled finances, schedules, routines, and even expectations of who she should be. He wanted order, efficiency, predictability. She wanted connection, understanding, and a place to grieve. The marriage no longer felt like two people navigating life together. It felt like she was orbiting around him, held in place by momentum rather than love. And somewhere between the sleepless nights, the IVF cycles, and the relentless pace of his ambition, Justine realized this wasn't partnership. It was survival, control, the post-nuptial agreement, and the slow disappearance of Justine Musk. As their family grew, the imbalance in Elon and Justine's marriage became impossible to ignore. Elon's world revolved around efficiency, plans, systems, hierarchies, and without either of them noticing when it happened, that mindset seeped into their relationship. He began treating every disagreement like a problem that needed fixing, every emotional conversation like a distraction. When she expressed frustration or tried to assert herself, he responded with a line that cut deeper each time he repeated it. "If you were my employee, I would fire you." But the clearest sign of the growing power gap came earlier, just before their wedding, when Elon presented her with a financial document. It wasn't labeled as a prenuptial agreement. He insisted it was simply something his company's board required, a standard precaution, nothing she needed to worry about. Trusting him and still believing their marriage would last forever, she signed it without negotiation. It was a mistake that would return years later with devastating consequences. As the years passed, that agreement became symbolic of the entire relationship, decisions made quickly, his logic overriding her voice, and compromises that only moved in one direction. Justine had entered the marriage as an ambitious writer, someone with dreams of publishing novels. But somewhere between the births of 5 children and the increasingly rigid structure of their life, her identity began to fade. She wasn't a partner in his world, she was a supporting character. Even the home they built reflected the shift. Their 6,000-square-foot house in Bel Air was immaculate, efficient, and quiet. The children had routines. Elon had his workrooms, his schedules, his constant stream of calls. Justine had responsibilities. She once imagined a family grounded in warmth, patience, and shared emotion. Instead, her life became a series of tasks, feedings, school runs, doctor visits, endless management of 5 young children, while her husband poured every ounce of energy into saving Tesla from bankruptcy and attempting to launch rockets into orbit. The more successful he became, the further Justine drifted from the version of herself she recognized. She tried to talk to him about it, tried to explain how she felt overshadowed and unheard, but every attempt ended the same way. He didn't see the problem. To him, everything was functioning. To her, everything felt like it was slipping away. And then came the moment that pushed everything into sharp clarity, an accident that forced her to confront not only the state of her marriage, but the truth she had been avoiding for years. The breaking point, the accident, the ultimatum, and the text that ended the marriage. The breaking point didn't arrive with a fight or a dramatic confrontation. It came quietly, on an ordinary afternoon in early 2008, when Justine was involved in a car accident. The crash wasn't fatal, but the moment her car spun and the world jolted sideways, her first thought wasn't for herself or her children. It was, how is Elon going to react to this? That single instinct terrified her more than the accident itself. She realized she had stopped living as a partner and had become someone trying to avoid disappointing a man who barely saw her anymore. When she came home shaken, Elon didn't respond with concern. He asked if she had followed the rules of the road. He treated the accident like another inefficiency to be corrected. And in that moment, Justine finally saw the truth in full clarity. She no longer recognized the woman in the mirror. Her platinum blonde hair, her thin frame, her calm, quiet voice, she had molded herself into the version of a wife she believed Elon wanted, and in doing so, she had erased pieces of herself. She asked for counseling, not to assign blame, but to rebuild something human between them. Elon agreed, but with conditions. Progress needed to be immediate. After only a few sessions, he delivered an ultimatum. Fix the marriage now or accept that it was over. And the next day, without any further discussion, he filed for divorce. Justine was still trying to process it when the final blow arrived 6 weeks later. Elon sent a text message, short, emotionless, and definitive. He told her that he was already engaged to someone else. The woman was Tallulah Riley, a 22-year-old British actress he had met in London while still married. There had been no warning, no conversation, no attempt at closure, just a cold statement that the life they had built, the grief they had endured, the 5 children they shared, was being replaced in a single sentence. Justine later said that message was the moment everything inside her went still, not because the marriage was ending, but because she finally understood it had ended long before she realized. The legal battle, the public fallout, and Justine's fight to reclaim herself. The divorce that followed was not a quiet unraveling. It became a 2-year legal battle shaped by the very document Justine had signed years earlier without hesitation. The post-nuptial agreement, presented before their wedding under the reassurance that it was a simple formality, now determined nearly every financial aspect of her future. By 2008, Elon's net worth had soared past $100 million following the PayPal sale, and the lifestyle they had shared reflected that. But the contract she'd signed limited nearly all claims to marital assets, leaving her with a fraction of what she expected and little leverage to challenge the terms. Justine's lawyers argued that the agreement was invalid because Elon hadn't fully disclosed his rapidly rising wealth at the time she signed it. They insisted the contract was fundamentally unfair, built on an imbalance of information and power. Elon's team countered that she had signed willingly and that the contract should stand. The court ultimately ruled in his favor, though the judge acknowledged the unusual complexity of the case and certified it for appeal. But by then, Justine had stopped fighting for money. She focused entirely on securing stability for their 5 children. In 2010, she did something few ex-wives of billionaires ever dared. She told the truth publicly. In an essay for Marie Claire, she detailed her marriage, the emotional neglect, the imbalance of power, the loneliness of grieving a child alone, and the moment Elon replaced her through a text message. She wasn't vindictive or cruel. She was honest in a way that startled people. Many had only ever seen Elon Musk as a visionary entrepreneur, a man building rockets and electric cars. Few had considered the cost of living beside that kind of ambition. Her essay drew sympathy, criticism, and curiosity, but for Justine, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the voice she had lost. For years, she had lived in Elon's orbit, her identity overshadowed by the speed of his success. Telling her story was the first time she stepped outside that shadow. It was also the moment she finally began rebuilding the life she had abandoned long ago, a life where she was no longer Elon Musk's wife, but Justine Musk again. Life after Elon, reinvention, motherhood, and the peace she finally found. When the legal papers were finally signed and the public scrutiny faded, Justine Musk faced a life that was both unfamiliar and strangely liberating. For the first time in nearly a decade, she wasn't navigating her days around Elon's schedule, his demands, or the gravitational pull of his ambition. She was alone, but she was no longer invisible. She moved to Los Angeles, determined to rebuild a life she recognized, one that didn't revolve around a man who viewed emotions as inefficiencies. Her first act of freedom was symbolic. She cut her hair, letting go of the platinum blonde look she had adopted to fit Elon's preferences. Then she returned to writing, the passion she had abandoned somewhere between IVF cycles and Silicon Valley chaos. She published novels that explored resilience, identity, and the emotional terrain of being a woman expected to disappear behind someone else's greatness. Her work didn't just resonate with readers, it gave her back the voice she had nearly lost. Motherhood remained the center of her world. She and Elon maintained joint custody, communicating only through his assistant for the sake of the children. She refused to speak ill of him in front of them and encouraged their relationship with their father, even when contact was sporadic. She believed that healing didn't come from bitterness, but from clarity. Her children knew the truth. Their parents were better apart than together. What surprised many people was Justine's unexpected friendship with Tallulah Riley, the woman Elon had announced his engagement to over text. Instead of resentment, Justine chose empathy. Tallulah had stepped into a world she herself had barely survived. The two women developed a quiet respect, even warmth, bound by the shared understanding of what it meant to live in the orbit of a man whose brilliance and emotional distance existed side by side. Over time, the anger dissolved. The heartbreak softened. Justine realized that leaving Elon allowed her to reclaim her independence, her identity, and her peace. She built a new life, quiet, creative, authentic, far from the headlines and the pressure of being attached to one of the world's most examined men. Looking back, she didn't regret the marriage or the pain that followed. Every moment had led her to the person she became, stronger, clearer, and no longer afraid to speak her truth. Justine Musk walked away the moment she realized she had disappeared inside someone else's life. And in the end, that decision gave her back everything she had lost. What do you think was the real breaking point for her? Tell us your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this.